Hello, and welcome to our lecture today. I'm so excited to talk to you about religion and philosophy in the ancient world. And today we are going to expand our discussion outside of just the Afro Mediterranean world um, to really look at the influence of religion and philosophy and art. Um, Throughout a number of historical examples, including China, India, as well as across what will become the Judeo Christian world around the Mediterranean. So, a couple of things as we go through this. One, remember that you do have a final project in our class. Um, Next week or in the next coming weeks, you will have to tell me what you decide to research for this final project. Anything that we discuss in the lectures are available, any of these topics, but I will offer a list of topics to you. And my topics tend to be much more specific to um, people, sort of the environment, and art. If you're interested in other topics, which of course there are many, you will certainly need approval, but I will offer a list. Potential topics, just that I think that might be helpful. All right. So I want to begin first with this piece of art that you see right here, which is a drawing. Looks like it is probably a painting of Chinese beliefs. And I don't know what sort of stands out to you about this picture, but these are two men sort of cradling a male heir. And the reason this is used is that it really sort of underscores what will become the central component of Chinese society, which is this relationship between father and son. As we have identified and defined previously, patriarchy, the system that sort of emphasizes and sort of shows deference to men over women, um, is the society that is developing in ancient China, and that's reflected in their art. So even if we don't know much about China, just by looking at the ways that they are representing their culture, right, their beliefs, their practices, their society, we can start to infer many ways that they're many. We can start to sort of infer um, these larger ideas and place them in its historical context. I feel like I could have said that much better. But art gives us insight into how they see themselves and how they actually practice their beliefs, right? I think that's a better way of saying it. All right. So I just wanted to point that out to you. When we look at ancient China, China civilization emerges around 8,000 years ago, like its counterparts in Egypt and the Middle East and the Western Hemisphere and North and South America. These represent some of the oldest civilizations on our planet. China gives us a lot to consider. Let me see if I can pull up a map very quickly. Here we go. China, again, we've made this point before, but China is the most geographically isolated in the ancient world. This part of the world, obviously, along the Nile and the Mediterranean, the Tigris and Euphrates, all the way to the Indus River in India. There is a great deal of cultural exchange, contact going on here. Here, however, although there are people from the Korean Peninsula all the way down to Cambodia that speak a variety of languages, have different ethnicities, same way here. This region is much more sort of interactive. One of the sort of unique features of Chinese history is its exclusion from the rest of the world. Perhaps that's also a result of its geography and its environment, as you have a series of mountains right here, the Himalayas, as well as the Gobi Desert, which is here, and then, of course, this very large desert here, making it this terrain in order to get into China and, quite frankly, out of China is quite difficult. So that's one thing to consider. Um, but Chinese civilizations, just like the first civilization here in the Middle East that will develop between the Tigris and Euphrates in China, it's right here between the Yangtze and the Yellow Rivers. That's where we'll see the first evidence of civilizations, agriculture, writing, militaries, and even the beginning of what becomes sort of the unique force, which is feudalism in China. They will also go through an imperial period that again becomes one of the most brutal periods in Chinese history. Like other regions, right? China is dealing with a number of issues in terms of how to sort of organize and function in terms of a society. And one of the ideas that gets pushed forth in the First Empire in Chinese history is something known as legalism or the legalist philosophy. And it is articulated by its author, Hong, and I know I'm not pronouncing his name right, Han Yi. And sort of the simplest idea of legalist philosophy is a very pessimistic view of humanity. It goes something like this. Humans are motivated by fear, right? So in order for humans to do their work, to be productive, a government must instill fear into its people. And perhaps this pessimistic view is because China is dealing with a large population. Perhaps this pessimistic view of government is a factor of Chinese culture. But nonetheless, during the first emperor period of the Qin dynasty, we see that a quote unquote ordinary man from a less prominent family becomes the emperor of China. And this, he, who is the Chen, the emperor, is very much going to take these ideas and implement them as practice. Now, the legalist view that society is very pessimistic and people are sort of inherently evil and you have to create fear in order to motivate is not the only philosophy around. Just like today, right, there is certainly examples within the current occupant in the White House of using fear as a motivating tool. There would also be examples, right, historically, politically in the United States, as well as in the ancient world, of people who are motivating by offering a different view of the world. And in one way, the Chinese already had this. Confucius, who is an ancient Chinese teacher and philosopher, who was around long before Qin as emperor, articulated a different idea. And his idea is one that is really based in this Chinese centrality of father-son relationships. And basically, you can think, well, how do you emulate a father-son relationship when it comes to government? That's what he's suggesting the Chinese leaders do, right? That citizens, subjects should treat their ruler, leader, right, as they would their father. Meaning you respect your father, you defer to your father, you listen to your father, you do what your father says. Confucius is going to argue that that's the best function of government, is really to be obedient to what they say. He's not saying question, he's not saying dissent, he's not saying repression either. But he's saying that we really should sort of go along with what the leaders say because they're the leader. And through the virtue of that, they have power, they have wisdom to dispense. Confucius lays this out in terms of a concept that's still very evident in China 6,000 years later, which is something known as filial piety. And that's that central concept of reverence for the elders. And again, the idea is to apply that concept to government. You also get ideas coming out of Confucius also related to other aspects of the family. Confucius is also going to argue that looking back on Chinese history, there is an understanding and again a reverence for these practices. Now, what becomes sort of a seminal question, particularly to outsiders, is Confucianism a philosophy or is it a religion? And it sort of depends on the practitioner. There are some that see it in a very non-religious way, as more as a practicality, a belief system, not a defined box, sort of answers all of life's questions. But there are some who will practice Confucianism in a much more sort of religious way. So it really depends on where we're looking, what type of Confucian practices that we would find. And here we see an illustration of these sort of different expressions, behaviors that demonstrate filial piety. And it is, what I think is interesting on this, it looks like a tapestry, is not only the characters themselves, but the writing, right? So the writings is instructing the viewer how to perform these actions to demonstrate reverence in this way. These two ideas are also not the only ones around. In China, there's another philosophy that it becomes highly popular. And it's important to remember these philosophies are created not in a vacuum. There is great political unrest that goes on in China for hundreds of years, an ongoing civil war called the era of the Warring States, where the feudal system in China has really broken down, and it's going to lead to the establishment of the first empire that then puts this legalist philosophy into actual practice with, fairly devastating consequences in terms of the population. And yet, it didn't have to be that way. There are other ideas that were just as well known that Emperor Chen could have responded to. And one of is Taoism. Taoism is first expressed by a man named Lao Tzu, who is a archivist. Don't know if you know what an archivist is, but an archivist is someone who sort of compiles, organizes, and keeps records. And you might some think of Confucianism as really being the opposite of Confucianism, where Confucianism is asking you to demonstrate your behavior. This is something very different than that. And this is the idea that, the best thing that one could do in a time of conflict is to remove oneself from conflict, right? In order to make change, you disengage in public life. This is also going to be practiced as both a philosophy and as a sort of popular religion that comes back into vogue sort of perennially across world history. And here you sort of see this expressed both in art and in words, this idea of finding one's center. And this Taoist philosophy is also going to argue that you have to connect with nature, that the idea of sitting next to a rock and listening to the waterfall and having a sort of visceral connection with nature is a imperative for humans. You have to connect with nature in this way. And that's very much expressed in these images as well. One of the other ways that Taoism is often sort of understood is with this symbol, the yin and the yang symbol, right? That there are sort of two sides of things and a harmonious balance is really what humans are attempting to attain. And you have the dark and the light, the sour and the sweet, the good and the bad, right? So this is about trying to find that, again, that harmonious center between two diametrically opposed forces. Now, if we take our time to really look at India, as we've done before, we're going to find a different set of circumstances and different religious beliefs and practices. And again, as you wrote about last week, the central component of these Hindu practices is demonstrated in this very rigid caste system. And Hinduism has its origins first in the Vedas and then in the Upanishads, and then sort of really crystallizes with this formidable religion, polytheistic religion that has been around for thousands of years, and the deification of a very large set of gods, goddesses with various powers that again explain not only Hindu history and where Hindu people come from, but explain how their society is also going to function. As you're writing about this week, then how does Hinduism create an entirely new religion, one that is sort of much more focused on a deity, right? The monotheism of Buddhism. Well, the story of the creation then of Buddhism is the story of Siddhartha Gautama, who is raised Hindu, is raised privileged at the top of the social ladder in the caste system, given every luxury in the world, and finds himself, right, extraordinarily unhappy, having not known about human suffering, having not known about sort of the real life aspects of what's going on outside his castle door. So Siddhartha Gautama, according to these beliefs, leaves his wife and child and all the pleasures and luxury and privileges of being a prince in India and travels. And within his travels, he sort of uncovers many of the problems with Hinduism, most central being, right, reincarnation. So you might think of the central idea of Buddhism is to stop the process of reincarnation in order to achieve enlightenment, or to sort of ascend into a heavenly place where you're not constantly coming back to earth. And the Buddha has these revelations along the way explaining how one does this, right? And you have to stop wanting. You have to curb your desire. You also have to sort of move outside yourself in order to do that. And in so doing, he is challenging sort of the fundamental idea of Hinduism and creating an entirely new order. One of the other things that Buddhism is really advocating is to upset the Hindu caste system, right? The belief is that for the untouchables, they will remain untouchable. There is never a way to end this process of reincarnation. And Siddhartha and this new belief system known as Buddhism gives hope out of this endless cycle. And as we could see, some of the earliest Buddhist temples are organized by females, by women nuns, who are really breathing life into these practices. It's going to appeal to the lower caste of Hindu society as well as women. And not only will these beliefs create an entirely new religion, but then Buddhism itself is also going to fracture along many of these lines. There will not be just one practice of Buddhism. It will also have subsects to it. But what you see right here is considered sort of the classic image of the Buddha. And let me show you some of these characteristics so you will know what to look for as you are submitting this assignment this week. So the assignment this week is asking you to look at the specific examples of Buddha to demonstrate how it changes over time. the representations. So these are some of the things that you will see. Typically in a traditional Buddha, right, this is the headdress. So you will see this one identifying characteristic is the use of, of this particular type of adornment on the head. The other thing to look for are the elongated earlobes right here, right? This is also a sign of intelligence, of divinity. You have the this Hindu symbol right here on the forehead. Sometimes you're going to see Buddhas who have it. Arguably, the farther away from India, you're going to lose this sort of ancient Hindu symbol. You also will have the crown. So typically, a Buddha is going to have some sort of enlightenment crown around the head. The other thing is the position of the hands, right? The hand's going to be placed in a position that is still sort of done in yoga today. And you can also look at the folds in the dress. He's also sitting, right, in this lotus position with his feet above on the thigh. So this becomes one of the most classic examples of the Buddha and representing the Buddha's enlightenment. All right, I'm going to skip some of this just in terms of time and taking us towards Zoroastrianism and this sort of movement towards monotheism, right? So as you're discussing this week, Zoroastrianism is this ancient Persian religion where there are two gods, Zarathustra and Ahura Mazda. It develops during the Persian or Achaemenid dynasty. And again, a central idea is that these two gods, a good god and a bad god, are engaged in an epic battle for human salvation that has been going on for 12,000 years. Although they are engaged in this battle, humans can have agency and sort of push the scales towards good if you do good work, say good things, practice your religion. So this battle can be influenced by human behavior. So it spreads with the Persian Empire, and you can also start to see how it is going to slowly become, even though it's still practiced today, slowly become replaced by the sort of major monotheistic religions that emerge out of Judaism, including not only Judaism, but Christianity, and then later Islam. Now, we're also going to see that this heavily influences Judaism throughout the Persians, and this becomes one of the more famous representations of Zoroastrianism in art. So this is the angry god, and he's often presented, I think, by a lion. You see sort of the good god, and of course, you have the writing here, which is also instructive. All right, so we see the first example of true monotheism in the practice of Judaism and what will be the kingdoms of Israel and Judea, the two Jewish kingdoms that establish themselves here. Now, it's going to be conquered, like I said, by Persia, and then they become independent, and it's going to be conquered again, and they become independent, and then Israel's conquered again, sort of over and over and over again. And they're conquered by, again, different people. Sometimes it's Persia, it'll be Greece, it'll be the Romans, right? That is part of the sort of history of contact in the region. Oh, let me go back, sorry. Under Hebrew control, however, is when we really start to see monotheism practiced, and again, claiming this particular part of land as ordained by God. And this is some of the particulars to sort of know, right? Is that what happens here is that these Hebrew people will say they are in a covenant with God, a contract with God, that God has, and just not the polytheistic gods, right? The one God chose them to be the people, the chosen people. That is the language that is used. And not only that, it's this land of milk and honey, this very fertile land around the Jordan and around the Jordan River, along the Mediterranean, that is given. And this is also what I think is one of the more interesting parts of Judaism. It identifies that this land is ours, right? This is a product of the agricultural revolution. This is such a monumental change in the course of human spirituality and the development of religion, saying that this is our land given by God. And when we break that down and just sort of sit with that for a minute, we can see it's going to become revolutionary, right? The idea that the gods have selected this land for a chosen people, that's fairly remarkable. So the concepts are important to know. And then, of course, there will be reform movements, just like we see reform movements in Hinduism that give rise to Buddhism, reform movements in China that are creating different philosophies, even competing philosophies. Not all those Hebrews and those who practice Judaism are going to agree on the way that it's practiced. And we will see reform movements from the Essenes to other groups, the Zealots, as well as Jesus of Nazareth, who is attempting to create a more equitable space within this religion as it's part of the Roman Empire. All right. Another part of this is to also think about philosophy. And in the Greek tradition, one of the guiding ideas that will illuminate Western thought is this idea of rationalism. And what it means, and you might know this if you are taking Intro to Philosophy or Critical Thinking or any philosophy course, is that the belief that humans can have rational thought, right? That we can change our minds, that we can apply evidence and sort of the scientific theory in order to understand our world. And this is not only emphasized during the scientific revolution, what was that, like 400 years ago, but it's also demonstrating itself in the 8th century BCE and the Greek tradition. And in certain parts of Greece, certainly ideas of science and math are very much considered sort of the height of cultural development, with people like Socrates and other philosophers really symbolizing these things. But, well, I don't know. I mean, we say this, but these philosophers are also considered to be quite radical and very controversial. And they're also considered to be a threat to the establishment. So even though there is this belief that they are revered, they're also considered controversial and potentially politically dangerous. And I think it's important to understand that as well. And here you see sort of Plato and these philosophers depicted in art, where they are seen as having these Socratic conversations where they are creating academic discourse, and the belief that that is valued, although it is under assault currently in the United States. We have to wonder: is it still valued? Is the idea of Socratic conversation something that has any place in the 21st century? Perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps it is a relic of antiquity. But this was at least revered in some form at the time. The idea of learning for learning's sake, right? Not that you're going to make money off of it or that it would even change your social position, but in order to feed the human mind. All right. So let's turn this attention then to Christianity. And when we look at Christianity with comparisons to Buddhism, we see interesting parallels in their family backgrounds, right? Although different. Siddhartha Gupta, again, emerges from this place of power and privilege where the character of Jesus of Nazareth in the Judeo-Christian traditions, is poor. His family doesn't have a lot of money. And not only that, this is a family that has been displaced by the Roman occupation of the Jewish world. So different sort of backgrounds and family structures within these two characters. Both of these two religious characters are spiritual seekers, right? They are attempting to find the truth, quote unquote, the key to sort of human happiness, if you will. They both also will sort of be wisdom teachers, right? Their lives instructive on how others should live. So the Buddha is going to be very instructive on and tell people through the full tenfold path or the Four Noble Truth how they can apply these ideas to their everyday life to become sort of quote unquote better. The same way with the Gospels that are become part of the New Testament. New Testament, right? The Gospels are the words, sayings, and the life story as told by four different interlopers. What Jesus said, how he lived, what the message is. And there's a wisdom that's very much a part of that, right? And it is a message of hope. It is a message of everlasting life. It is a message of forgiveness. It is a message of acceptance and equality, and not just for some, but for all. But there are also important differences that we see emerge within these two sort of competing, rather, ideologies. And that it will also play out in terms of politics, in terms of culture, in terms of economics, in every way. Going forward with this comparison, each of these, both of these religious characters are going to create new religions. Or rather, they won't create new religions. Followers will create new religions based on these ideas. So Buddha is given that title, Buddha, the enlightened one, right? Not during his lifetime, but only after the death. The same thing with Jesus of Nazareth. He's Jesus of Nazareth until the resurrection, and it's only after sort of the Greek occupation or rather the spreading of this idea into the Greek world that we see the idea of the Christos, right? Which is the Messiah, the chosen one. So Buddha is the enlightened one, then Jesus of Nazareth as the Christos, or Jesus Christ, as the chosen one. The spread of Christianity is a fascinating story, as again, Jesus of Nazareth is not out to create a new religion. He is out to reform practices of Judaism. And yet within this world, some of the early converts, of course, are Jews, Paul of Tarsus being one, who is walking the roads of the Roman Empire out of places like Galilee into Syria, modern day Syria, Damascus, modern day Turkey, spreading what is called the good news, right? The good news of hope. And as polytheism is the official religion of Rome at the time, these Christians, these early converts, are persecuted for their beliefs because their beliefs are considered to be politically damaging to the Roman Empire. We would see sort of a similar idea in Buddhism. Buddhism undercuts Hindu government. It undercuts Hindu power. So the spread of Buddhism is seen politically threatening to Hindu and this sort of Indus River culture that has developed in the region. Roman polytheism, right? So Roman emperors are still polytheistic, worshiping gods and goddesses. And in this way, this movement towards Christianity and this idea of monotheism, again, is threatening to the entire Roman world. Some of the earliest Christians are women. Many of these women conducted what were called home churches, allowing people to come into their home, as there's not one organized church. That's not going to come till much later. Um, and worshiping. And one of the interesting early martyrs is a woman named Perpetua. And women play a very important role in this time in the first century. And yet, we could certainly discuss how women will continue to influence um, the Catholic Church, as there's not a lot of room for women with the institutionalization of Christian practices. But let's start with Perpetua. So Perpetua is a Christian noble woman. So she's a Christian, and she has some money, and this is her face represented in a mosaic. And she had a family in North Africa, Tunisia, I believe, the city of Tunis, and where there was also a sort of growing Christian community. The Romans invade, and she's arrested. She's arrested along with her family. But her father, who is a polytheistic man, comes to her very famously, says there, the guards are going to let you out if you say you don't believe. And of course, right, she won't do it. She won't denounce her faith. She will not say she doesn't believe. If she understands what he's saying, all of that, very rational, and yet will not do it, right? And then so she and her family, very famously, is often done in the Roman world, are then sort of religious prisoners, are then thrown into the gladiator wrestling ring with famous lions who then eat them and tear them up. And so she becomes a martyr, right? Someone who dies for the practice of Christianity. And again, what's significant amongst martyrs is they are prosecuted for their beliefs and do not denounce faith, right? That's how you become a martyred in the Christian faith. So it's interesting to me how there are lots of early examples of women martyrs, and then with the institutionalization of Catholicism, women are not really given much of a place in Christian, in the practice at least. So I think this is really interesting. It shows us just how fast Christianity is going to spread, right? If it emerges here, it really goes all over the Mediterranean world, right? Into Anatolia, that's Turkey, as I mentioned before. It will go into other parts of the Balkans. We'll go out of where East meets West, right here in modern day Turkey, into Italy, Greece, all the way to the Iberian Peninsula here, France, England, right? As well as Africa. One of the places we're really going to look at where Christianity takes hold is in Ethiopia, or the Kingdom of Axum. But we do see versions of Afro-Christianity here, and of course, moving along the eastern coast of Africa. And then she would have been, right, like in here. So and of course, Christianity moves east, although not as well known. It is moving along the Silk Roads, and we're going to talk more about sort of how it evolves and changes. But there will be, right, different ways Christianity is practiced. The way we see Christianity practiced in Axum is going to be different from the way it's practiced in the Greek world. The way it's practiced in the Greek world is going to be different from the way Christianity is practiced here or here. Similarly, right, the spread of Buddhism is also sort of in this circular motion. It's going to come out of India, right? It's going to spread south. It also spreads to the southeast. It spreads into China, spreads to Korea, and also into the islands of Japan to a lesser extent, with also these, right? Southeast India becoming another hot spot of Buddhist conversion. So I like to have students really think about what it means for religions to not only migrate out of their region of origin, but then what does it mean? What's the process for converts? How do religious practices change as they move into different parts of the world? And they're not going to be practiced the same way. which I think is really interesting. Um, in the 3rd century Common Era, around 300, the Emperor of Rome, of the Roman Empire, Constantine, very famously converts to Christian beliefs. And as you might imagine, then we're going to see a whole lot of people start to convert to Christianity. So in the Roman world, it really starts with the leader. Well, it doesn't start with the leader, sorry. It starts with ordinary people, but who are being persecuted for being Christian. But once the leader converts, right, then we're going to see a shift where Christians are no longer persecuted, but those who were practicing the official state-sponsored polytheistic religion start to get executed by the state for their practices. All right. So what we see also when we let me do this one and then I'll wrap it on up. What we see when we look at the birth of Christianity versus as compared with or juxtaposed to Buddhist comparisons are a couple of things. One is there's going to be a very patriarchal Christian hierarchy that emerges after Constantine's conversions, and that is the Roman Catholic Church. There's also a series of church meetings led by the same sort of self-appointed leaders of Christianity that make serious decisions about sort of the history of Christianity, including the idea of Jesus' divinity, something known as transubstantiation, and really picking, right, the versions of the Gospels that we will find. And the Roman Catholic Bible is going to look very different from sort of modern Protestant retellings. And so that's also interesting. There are also divisions in Buddhism. There will be different practices of Buddhism. However, there is no church hierarchy. There is no one centralized power in Buddhism the way that it is functioning in the Catholic world. And that's very important to know as well. So here are a couple different representations of Buddha. Again, as we will see, this is a sculpture, The Temptation of the Buddha, and Siddhartha at the Bodhi tree. So as I pointed out before, he has the headdress, right? So his hair is up usually in that particular fold, a little bit of elongated ears. You can see the folds in the dress. He's standing, right, because he hasn't been enlightened yet. He's still Siddhartha, not the Buddha. So he is, just as we would see Jesus of Nazareth had to go through a number of sort of exercises or challenges about faith, same concept for this religious character as well. Here's another picture of the Buddha, right? So this is the Indian Buddha, not sitting, but his hands are right in the correct position. You see the anointed head, this the hair on top representing the enlightenment, the elongated ears, and then of course the folds in the dress. So it doesn't have all of those sort of same ingredients as a quote-unquote classical Buddha, but it has many for us to be able to identify. Now, as Buddhism is traveling for different places, right? This is a bodhisattva of compassion. And what's most striking of this representation of the Buddha is the use of Hindu imagery, that sort of multi-armed imagery that we see in Hindu art is very much here. So some aspects of the Buddha, he's sitting in this lotus pose. His hands are in the correct position. Of course, there are many hands, but you have these two, right, that are in the correct position. You have the elongated ears, and of course, an even more sort of elevated headdress, demonstrating this enlightenment. And here's another image of the Maitreya Buddha that's it's going to have a lot of converts in China. And interestingly, right? So here you have the Indian Buddha, very skinny. Here you have a Chinese Buddha who has become much more robust in size. But other aspects, right? We don't see the headdress. That's interesting. That's a difference. Ears are elongated. You see the folds, but he's not in the traditional Hindu position, nor are his hands. So you could also sort of pick apart what that means through this particular sect of Buddhism. All right. So for this week, you are going to consider how these representations change over time, looking at the specific images that are identified in the assignment. You also want to make sure that you are posting in the discussion, submitting your quiz, and of course, letting me know if you have any questions. Um, Let me know. I look forward to hearing from you, Sue, and reading your responses and your assignment submission.